We rely on police officers to protect us when we're in trouble, but sadly, oftentimes they pose a threat to our safety. But sometimes they believe they could break the rules, twist the law, and misuse their power without facing any consequences.
Right there, son.
You're shaking really bad, man. What's in the bag? Have you ever seen this before?
No, what is that?
Let's hang out with Deputy Jackson here.
However, they are about to learn, in the most painful ways, that no one is above the law.
I shed bad light on the office of sheriff. For this, I am terribly sorry.
Join us on this compelling journey as we witness some dirty cops reacting to unexpected prison sentences. Number 20. Derek Michael Chauvin. Derek Michael Chauvin used to work as a police officer in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He became widely known for his involvement in the death of George Floyd, an African-American man who was not armed. Before George Floyd's tragic death, Derek had a history of receiving 18 different complaints against him. On May 25, 2020, George was accused of trying to use a fake $20 bill at a store. When Derek and other officers arrived at the scene, they claimed that George resisted arrest. Later, footage from police body cameras revealed Derek kneeling on George's neck for a significant amount of time. During this ordeal, George repeatedly cried out that he couldn't breathe. Sadly, George eventually died while in police custody. Several bystanders witnessed the incident and recorded videos, which quickly spread online, sparking widespread outrage across the country. Many people took to the streets in protest against police brutality and racial injustice. Derek was eventually arrested and charged with third-degree murder and manslaughter. After a jury trial, he was found guilty and was sentenced to 22.5 years in prison for second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. During the sentencing, Chauvin offered brief remarks, expressing his condolences to the Floyd family without showing visible emotion. He did not apologize directly, but mentioned that more information would be revealed later, which many interpreted as a reference to ongoing legal matters and appeals. Number 19. Michael Valva. Michael Valva, once a cop in New York City, was found guilty of second-degree murder for the death of his 8-year-old son Thomas. He was sentenced to spend at least 40 years in prison. The whole story kicked off on January 17, 2020, when Valva dialed 911, claiming his son had fallen at home and stopped breathing. Sadly, Thomas didn't make it, and an autopsy revealed he froze to death. Investigators soon found out it was no accident. Thomas and his older brother Anthony had endured awful treatment from Valva and his fiancée, Angela Polina. They were forced to sleep in a freezing garage because they wet the bed. Temperatures dropped so low that Thomas suffered severe hypothermia. Even before this tragedy, Valva's ex-wife had warned child services about his abusive behavior, but nothing changed. During the trial, jurors heard disturbing audio recordings where Valva and Polina mocked Thomas as he struggled to breathe.
My name is Michael. I'm a police officer with the city of New York. My son, I think
Valva even said he didn't care if Thomas lived or died.
I love Thomas with all my heart.
On March 2021, both Valva and Polina were convicted of second-degree murder and got the same sentence of 25 years behind bars. Michael Valva appeared visibly emotional during his sentencing, expressing regret and sorrow. Despite his tears and apologies, the judge and public remained largely unmoved, focusing instead on the severity of his actions and the impact on his children. Number 18. Wayne Couzens. Wayne Couzens, once a police officer, served in the Metropolitan Police for nearly 10 years. He was part of a special unit called the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command when he got arrested. This unit, where another former officer named David Carrick also worked, became infamous because both men misused their authority to harm vulnerable women. Couzens was found guilty of kidnapping, sexually assaulting, and murdering Sarah Eberhart on March 2021. Eberhart was walking home when Couzens kidnapped her. Her body was discovered in a wooded area in Kent, sparking widespread anger and protests against violence towards women. During his trial in September and October 2021, Couzens admitted to all charges. He used his police training and equipment, like handcuffs and a police ID, to commit the crimes. On December 2021, he received a life sentence without parole. During his sentencing at the Old Bailey, Couzens appeared emotionless and showed no visible reaction as he received a whole life order. the most severe punishment in the UK judicial system. Number 17. Michael Dotro. Michael Dotro, a former police officer from Edison. He got really angry at other cops who he felt had crossed him while he was on duty. So, he decided to get back at them. He got arrested for setting his supervisor's house on fire. The charges against him were serious. He was accused of trying to kill someone, starting a fire on purpose, and doing bad stuff while on duty. The worst part was that his supervisor and family were home when he set the fire, but thankfully, they all got out okay. During the trial, Dotro didn't say much, even when the judge talked about how his actions scared people from seeking justice. But setting the fire wasn't the only bad thing Dotro did. He also got in trouble for looking at police files and telling his wife about a case involving a woman he was seeing. He admitted to trying to get back at another officer who had given a ticket to someone he knew. Dotro ended up with a long time in prison. 20 years for trying to kill someone, 10 years for starting the fire, 10 years for being a bad cop, 5 years for trying to mess with a witness, and a year and a half for trying to get revenge. He'll be in jail for all of those at the same time. During the sentencing, Dotro remained notably silent and showed little to no emotion. He did not offer any statements or express remorse for his actions. His demeanor was starkly cold, which stood in contrast to the emotional impact his actions had on his victims and the community. Number 16. Kenneth Blue. Kenneth Blue, a former cop, shocked both the community and law enforcement officials with his criminal acts. One of the worst crimes he committed was killing Jennifer Webb, a 32-year-old pregnant woman. Surprisingly, Blue was the father of Webb's unborn child, even though he was married and tried to hide their relationship. Reports say Blue convinced Webb to meet him to talk about child support in a secluded place. Once there, he supposedly shot her and left her to die. Luckily, a driver found Webb's body and called for help. Investigators quickly figured out Blue was a suspect, linking him to the scene with evidence like a bullet and tire marks. Also, a fellow inmate shared information about Blue admitting to the murder. During the trial, the prosecution showed lots of evidence against Blue, including DNA proving he was the father of Webb's child. Even though the defense tried to argue Blue's mental state at the time, the jury didn't buy it and found him guilty of first-degree murder. So, Blue got life in prison without parole, hoping to give some justice to Jennifer Webb and her family. His reaction, as well as the reactions of those present, were telling. Blue displayed a range of emotions, including visible distress and disbelief at the gravity of his situation. This reaction contrasted sharply with his earlier attempts to portray himself as innocent. Number 15. David Dixon. David Dixon, a former Pentagon cop, made big news on April 2021 when he shot and killed 2 guys in the parking lot of his Maryland apartment complex. Reports say Dixon, while not on duty, found 3 guys allegedly breaking into a car. He says he shot at them in self-defense as they tried to drive off in the stolen car. Sadly, his shots hit and killed Dominic Williams, 32, and James Lionel Johnson, 38, while another guy named Michael Thomas survived and became a witness. Dixon's defense was that he shot to stop the burglars from putting his life in danger by driving at him. But video evidence contradicted this, showing he shot after the car passed him, suggesting no immediate danger. Thomas, the surviving burglar, backed this up, saying Dixon's actions weren't justified, especially since he was off duty. Also, Thomas admitted to being involved in the car theft during a 911 call after fleeing the shooting scene. In another incident in 2020, he pointed a rifle at a homeless woman wearing flip-flops in his building's lobby. Despite this, Dixon didn't face any charges. Dixon got 25 years in prison for what he did. His reaction to the sentencing was one of apparent disbelief and distress. During the trial, Dixon had maintained his innocence, arguing that he had acted out of a perceived need to protect himself. The court, however, found his actions to be unwarranted and excessive given the circumstances. Number 14. Wayne Jenkins. Wayne Jenkins used to be a cop in Baltimore, Maryland, leading a special team called the Gun Trace Task Force. This team's job was to investigate violent crimes and illegal gun trafficking. Jenkins worked as a cop for more than 10 years until he got caught up in a big corruption scandal. It all started in 2015 when the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI got a tip that Jenkins and his team were robbing people while on duty. The FBI dug deeper and found out that Jenkins and his crew were up to all sorts of illegal stuff, like stealing, selling drugs, and even planting evidence on innocent people. Jenkins was the boss, and he used his position to plan most of these crimes. They'd rob drug dealers and others they thought had cash or drugs, then sell what they stole for a profit. Sometimes they'd even frame people just to make their cases look stronger. But their luck ran out when they robbed someone who turned out to be working with the FBI. That led to a big investigation that showed just how corrupt Jenkins and his team were. In 2017, Jenkins and 6 other cops were charged with serious crimes like racketeering. This case was one of the biggest corruption investigations in Baltimore's police history. Jenkins ended up pleading guilty to a bunch of charges and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. He expressed remorse during his sentencing, stating that he was devastated and apologizing to the victims of his crimes. He claimed that his actions were driven by a desire to keep his family financially stable. Number 13. Zachary Wester. Zachary Wester, a former cop in Jackson County, Florida, was accused of planting drugs on drivers he pulled over and then unfairly arresting them. The trouble began when a lawyer in Jackson County noticed some odd things about the cases Wester was bringing to court. The lawyer contacted the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, FDLE, which investigated Wester's behavior. They found a long history of wrongdoing and misuse of power by Westerners. Eventually, he was arrested and found guilty of many crimes. According to the investigation, Wester regularly searched cars illegally during traffic stops and put drugs or other illegal items in them. He would then arrest the drivers on false charges and lie about what happened. Sometimes, he even stole money from the people he arrested. There were many instances of Wester's misconduct, including at least 12 cases where he wrongly arrested people for drug offenses. In one case, he was caught on his body camera planting drugs in a woman's car. In another, he arrested a man for drugs even though there were no drugs in the man's truck. Wester was fired from his job in August 2019 and then arrested in July 2020. He faced numerous charges, including racketeering and fabricating evidence. He was also accused of lying under oath during a custody hearing. On May 2021, he was found guilty of many of the charges against him and sentenced to 12 years in prison. The judge also ordered him to compensate the people he had harmed. Wester displayed little emotion during his trial and subsequent sentencing. He maintained a demeanor of denial and detachment throughout the legal proceedings. Number 12. Charlie Reeder. Charlie Reeder, a former sheriff in Pike County, Ohio, was once highly respected in his community. He led a tough investigation into what became known as the Rodin Massacre, the worst crime the county had ever seen. This tragedy involved one family brutally killing 8 members of another. However, in 2021, Sheriff Reeder was caught and accused of stealing, being corrupt, and messing with evidence. He admitted he was wrong, feeling very sorry. Facing the court, he said sorry and asked for forgiveness.
I shed bad light on the office of sheriff. For this, I am terribly sorry.
In his plea, Sheriff Reeder admitted the shame his actions had brought to the respected position of sheriff in Ohio. He asked not only the court, but also his team, their families, the wider community, and his own family in the courtroom for forgiveness. He knew he had hurt them and apologized sincerely. He begged the judge for mercy, asking not to go to jail. He didn't just ask for himself, but also to take care of his elderly parents while they were still alive. He asked to do community service instead of going to jail, promising to make things right and show he still had goodness in him. During his sentencing, Reeder expressed deep remorse for his actions. He apologized to the court, his team, their families, the community, and his own family, acknowledging the significant shame and disappointment he had caused to the office of sheriff in Ohio. Number 11. David Oliver. Once celebrated as the head police officer of Brimfield, Massachusetts, David Oliver took on the respected role of police chief starting in 2004. However, his world came crashing down on January 2015. Accusations emerged from a female officer within his department, claiming he mistreated her emotionally, verbally, and physically. Despite admitting guilt, David was found guilty of stealing and illegally holding someone against their will in court. The female officer bravely shared her story, revealing that from the beginning, there were signs of trouble. Another female officer had warned her about the chief's overly friendly behavior, cautioning about his habit of crossing boundaries with physical contact. Yet, she convinced herself that she wouldn't be subjected to such behavior, thinking she could handle it. David Oliver faced the results of his actions in court. The judge gave him a series of punishments, totaling 20 months in prison, followed by 2 years of probation. Additionally, he lost his certification as a police officer and was not allowed to drive during his probationary period. Despite his downfall, David is working to make things right. After being released, he went back into business and started using his once popular Facebook page again. In interviews, he expresses regret for his past actions, describing his time in jail as a time of thinking and personal development. Number 10. Marcus Eberhart. In Atlanta, Marcus Eberhart, a former sergeant, and other officers were dealing with Gregory, a suspect. One of the officers tried to handcuff Gregory, but he escaped into the woods. Another officer caught up to him and managed to handcuff him eventually. Gregory struggled to get up, claiming fatigue. Marcus suggested using a taser if Gregory refused to cooperate. Despite attempts to rise, Gregory fell to the ground, prompting Marcus and another officer, Howard, to use their tasers on him. Paramedics were called, but Gregory's heart had stopped by the time they arrived, and he was pronounced dead. Marcus was charged with murder, and Howard with involuntary manslaughter. Both were sentenced to prison. Gregory's girlfriend, Azel Smith, regretted calling the police that day, believing it led to disaster. She felt guilty, thinking Gregory might still be alive if she hadn't called. She expressed her disdain for Marcus, stating she didn't want to hear anything from him. She spoke on Gregory's behalf, mentioning he was tasered 13 times, which proved fatal. The situation in Atlanta escalated when former Sergeant Marcus Eberhart and former Corporal Howard Weems faced charges in the 2014 tasing incident that resulted in Gregory Towns' death. A jury found them guilty, leading to their sentencing by a Fulton County judge. Eberhart experienced shock and disbelief upon his sentencing. Number 9. Lester Bohnenblust. Lester Bohnenblust, a 51-year-old man, was found guilty of attacking and forcefully pushing a male nurse to the ground at Jackson Memorial Hospital. He was charged with hurting someone over 65 and falsely imprisoning them. The whole thing started when Bohnenblust's niece, who was struggling mentally, was discharged from the hospital. Her dad brought her back the next day, but the doctors said she didn't need to stay. They told him to schedule another visit. Frustrated, the father called in Bohnenblust, who's a cop. When they got to the hospital, the nurse said they couldn't talk about the niece's situation in a public area. So he took them somewhere private. But things went south fast. Bohnenblust grabbed the nurse's jacket and threw him down, and this was caught on security footage. Bohnenblust got fired from the police force after this, even though he'd been on duty for 20 years. The judge sentenced Bohnenblust to 45 days in jail. He'll also be on probation for 3 years after that, and has to do 100 hours of community service. He expressed remorse for his actions and apologized to his victims. Number 8. Daniel Saylor. Daniel Saylor, once a top cop in Orange County, Florida, faced a dramatic downfall in 2011. He was booted from the force for misusing his authority and connections. His troubles started when he intervened in a minor battery incident involving his friend, Scott Bush, who was accused of a heinous crime, sexually assaulting a child under 12. Saylor also faced allegations of corruption. It was claimed he took a bribe to recruit an officer who had snapped pictures at the scene of Tiger Woods' infamous car crash in 2009. Daniel Saylor felt a heavy weight in his heart as the judge declared him guilty. But this time, Daniel was the one being taken away in handcuffs, not the one enforcing the law. He was accused of lying under oath and abusing his power. As he stood there, facing the consequences of his actions, he could only plead for leniency from the judge. However, his plea fell on deaf ears, and he was sentenced to 8 long years in prison. Despite Daniel's regrets and apologies, he had to face the punishment for his wrongdoing. After spending the entirety of his sentence behind bars, Daniel was eventually released from prison. Number 7. Norman Raja. In Florida, at the Palm Beach County Courthouse in West Palm Beach, a police officer named Norman Raja has been found guilty of manslaughter due to careless negligence and attempted first-degree murder with a gun. Officer Raja was arrested for the deadly shooting of Corey Jones, a 31-year-old black man, musician, and housing inspector, who was waiting for help on a highway after his car broke down. Corey Jones's tragic death drew significant media attention as part of a series of incidents involving the deaths of black men at the hands of law enforcement. His family and friends shared emotional tributes, condemning the brutality that their community has faced. A family member remarked, "This should never have happened. My uncle should still be with us, alive." The court heard that on August 18, 2015, at around 3:15 in the morning, Officer Raja, who was working undercover, approached a vehicle he believed was abandoned. Inside the car was Corey Jones, who was trying to get roadside assistance. Jones had a legally owned handgun with him. Raja claimed that Jones pointed the gun at him, but prosecutors argued that Raja fired at Jones even as he was trying to flee. Within moments, Raja shot 6 times, hitting Jones 3 times and killing him. Raja was sentenced to 25 years for each of the 2 charges, with the sentences to be served concurrently. Despite his brutality of his actions, he had no remorse whatsoever. Number 6. David Carrick. David Carrick had a short time serving in the British Army before starting work as a police officer in 2001. In 2009, he became part of the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Team. However, in 2002, there were serious accusations made against him regarding domestic abuse. Despite numerous complaints about his conduct, Carrick continued to work as an armed police officer until 2017. His colleagues nicknamed him Mean Dave because of his unkind behavior. Between 2003 and 2020, Carrick connected with several women through dating apps, only to later mistreat and harm them. He exploited his position to gain their trust and then controlled them through abuse. On October 2021, another woman came forward, stating that Carrick had assaulted her a year earlier. Her courage to speak up was influenced by the Sarah Eberhart case. Consequently, Carrick was arrested and suspended from his job. Initially, he denied the allegations, but in December 2022, he admitted guilty to 49 charges, which included sexual assault. Following Carrick's admission, the Metropolitan Police decided to review past complaints against its officers. Eventually, Carrick received his sentencing on February 6, 2023, where he was handed 36 life sentences. The judge ordered that he must serve a minimum of 30 years before being eligible for parole, with the earliest possible release set for May 2, 2052. In the aftermath of his sentencing, his reaction was a mix of shock and condemnation. Number 5. Aaron Dean. Aaron Dean used to be a police officer in Fort Worth. In 2019, he was involved in a tragic incident where he shot and killed a 28-year-old black woman named Atatiana Jefferson. It all started when a neighbor called the police to check on the house where Atatiana was staying, which belonged to her mother. Aaron Dean, who was 38 years old at the time, responded to the call. When he arrived, he saw Atatiana through a window. She was in the living room playing video games with her 8-year-old nephew. During the trial, the court watched deeply troubling body cam footage showing Aaron approaching the house and spotting Atatiana inside. He shouted at her to put her hands up and then shot her almost immediately. One of Aaron's partners from that night testified about the incident. The partner admitted he never saw Atatiana. When it was Aaron's turn to testify, he claimed he saw Atatiana holding a gun and believed he was acting in self-defense. He described seeing a figure with a gun aimed at him but wasn't sure about the details, like whether her hands were visible or how high she was holding the gun. The jury found him guilty of manslaughter, and he was sentenced to 11 years and 10 months in prison. After being found guilty of murder, Aaron Dean reportedly showed little emotion during his sentencing. He maintained his composure as the judge read out his sentence. Number 4. Shawn Quarter. Bloomfield police officer. Shawn Quarter, aged 35, has been accused of working with others to do wrong while on duty, messing with official papers, lying about what happened, and lying under oath. On June 7, 2012, Officer Shawn Quarter went to Marcus Jeter's house after Marcus and his girlfriend argued. Marcus left the house willingly, but Officer Quarter followed him onto the Garden State Parkway. Officer Quarter tried to make Marcus leave his car, but Marcus was scared and said no. Then Officer Quarter called for help, and when backup came, they crashed into Marcus's car. Officer Quarter then broke Marcus's car window and, with help, pulled Marcus out. Later, the officers wrote reports saying Marcus tried to take Officer Quarter's gun and hit one of the backup officers. Because of those reports, Marcus got charged with running from the police, fighting with them, hurting them, and trying to take a cop's gun. But when new proof came out, all charges against Marcus got dropped, and an investigation started against the officers. Before being punished, Officer Quarter told the judge he loved his kids more than anything and didn't want them to suffer because of what he did. Marcus, the person Officer Quarter arrested, was also in court and said Officer Quarter had a choice and didn't tell the truth when he should have. After being found guilty of doing wrong as a cop and messing with records, Officer Quarter got 5 years in state prison from Essex County Superior Court Judge Michael Raven. Despite the severity of the charges, Officer Quarter remained composed during the sentencing, showing little outward emotion. Number 3. Daniel Holtzclaw. Daniel Holtzclaw, a former cop from Oklahoma City Police Department, faced serious accusations involving multiple instances of sexual assault, including rape, sexual battery, and forced oral sex. These allegations arose from incidents occurring between December 2013 and June 2014, during which Holtzclaw supposedly targeted women of African American heritage. His victims were mostly from poor neighborhoods within the city, as per investigators. Holtzclaw's way of operating supposedly involved checking the backgrounds of women with outstanding warrants, unpaid parking fines, or prior criminal records. It's said that he carefully chose these individuals as his targets, using their tricky legal situations for his bad purposes. Even though he was put on leave, Holtzclaw kept getting paid until August 2014, when formal charges were finally brought against him. Later, in January 2015, he was officially fired from his job at the Oklahoma City Police Department. Legal proceedings against him started on November 2, 2015, marking the beginning of a tough journey through the justice system. During the trial, Holtzclaw said he didn't do it, pleading not guilty to all charges. However, on December 10, 2015, the verdict came, with Holtzclaw being found guilty on 18 counts. The seriousness of the crimes led the jury to suggest a huge sentence of 263 years in prison. After the conviction, Holtzclaw's legal team argued against the verdict, saying that important evidence had been kept from them during the trial. They quickly asked for a new trial, hoping to change the jury's decision. But their hopes were crushed when the judge refused their request. And following his sentencing, he maintained a stoic demeanor, showing very little emotion. Number 2. Dennis Perkins. Dennis Perkins used to be a cop in Louisiana. He was found guilty of hurting kids in a bad way. This happened in 2017 when one of the kids told a school counselor, who then told the cops. Perkins was arrested on August 2017 and faced 60 charges of hurting kids. During the trial, the kids talked about what Perkins did to them. The side against Perkins showed texts and pictures that backed up what the kids said. Perkins said people were making up stories about him, and that the kids were told to lie. But the judge said no to that, and sent Perkins to jail for 100 years without any chance of getting out early. Perkins got a lot of attention because he used to be a cop. He worked at a few different cop places, like the Livingston Parish Sheriff's Office, the Baton Rouge Police Department, and the Louisiana Attorney General's Office. People wondered how he kept being a cop even though there were accusations against him. After Perkins got convicted, his wife Cynthia Perkins got in trouble too. She got arrested for trying to mess with the case. She was said to have tried to pay one of the kids to take back what they said and scare them. Cynthia Perkins said she was guilty and got a deal. The judge gave her 41 years in jail as part of the deal. Her reaction to her sentencing was a mix of denial and shock. Number 1. Braulio Gonzalez. Braulio Gonzalez, a former police officer in Miami, was accused of sexually abusing 2 young girls, one of whom was a relative while threatening them with a gun. He faced charges for inappropriate behavior with a child and kidnapping over 2 years from 2011 to 2013, when the victims were 10 years old. The kidnapping charge stemmed from his first encounter with one of the girls, during which he allegedly woke her up at gunpoint and threatened her family if she didn't comply with him. Gonzalez then took her to his room and repeatedly assaulted her over the next 2 years. He was arrested in the year 2018 after one victim disclosed the abuse to her therapist. Despite being on house arrest awaiting trial, he continued to receive his salary from the police department. 9 months after his indictment, another victim came forward, leading to Gonzalez's imprisonment before his trial, where he was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life in prison. Expectedly, he showed no remorse or emotion during his trial and eventual sentencing. Police records suggest Gonzalez had assaulted other women before these incidents, with 3 ex-girlfriends reporting severe injuries, including broken bones, allegedly caused by Gonzalez, who also reportedly threatened them with firearms. Despite these reports, Gonzalez was not fired from the Miami-Dade police force. Do you think these cops deserved all of the unexpected sentencing they received? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section.